have parents who are trying to live vicariously through their kids, and maybe what the parent couldn't achieve, they want the child to, which is an unordinary amount of pressure, right?
Right.
Why would we dump that on the kid?
So, Darren Ault, you are a basketball coach and you've written a book called Out of Bounds. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and um, what the reason why you wrote the book?
Sure. So one small correction: I was a basketball coach
Okay.
for part of the reason, part of the events that happened during what are shared in my book, Out of Bounds. So without giving too much away, but yeah, I coached basketball for 33 years, all at the youth level. Started out at the Naval Academy Prep School, which is college prep, getting kids ready to for that next step, and eventually moved to seventh and eighth grade boys, and then I found my way into high school girls, and quite a dynamic difference between coaching boys and girls. But it was tremendous fun, great experiences, and I would say overall, over those 33 years, the overarching theme was it was a passion. It was wonderful. The experiences were great. However, I noticed in about the last 10 to 12 years that there was this recurring theme of more interference or more toxicity, if you will, from parents in that player coach relationship. And at first, I'm like, what is going on? Are people, smoking something or drinking the wrong coffee or whatever it is, or just the stresses of life? And why does it always seem to be focused on the coach, who's trying to help? Um, but I did notice they became more visceral, more angry, and it led up to me starting to kind of outline why, looking at as a pattern the incidences that occurred and trying to figure out why. And then eventually I tabled that for a little bit until a specific incident that I do talk about in the book at great length, where I was suspended as a coach for false accusation, and it ended up ending essentially my coaching career. But that became also the catalyst to writing this book. I mean, I literally woke up one morning kind of in that fog and heard write the book. Kind of like who was it? Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. Right? If you build it,
If
it
you
will
build it,
come.
they will come.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, man, I've had a lot of experiences. You say over the last 10 to 12 years, you've noticed a kind of a change in the way parents are. For us around here, it's not. We're about an hour north of Kansas City. For us around here, it's not basketball; it's baseball and or football, but primarily baseball. I see all kinds of parents. We've witnessed fights, we've witnessed arguments, we've witnessed like all out brawls on the baseball field. And for me, that's not the reason why my kids don't play sports. My kids aren't really sports type kids. I would love it if they wanted to play sports, but ultimately, they make that decision. But um, for me, it was watching that stuff. I was like, look, guys, like less than 1% of your kids are going to make it to the big time. Why are we being assholes to our kids? Because for no other reason than you think that they are better than what they are, or better than, or they should be better than what they are. And all that stuff is just, it crushes kids. It really does. And while I've never had that experience with sports, I have had that experience with music. And my middle son, he plays the viola, and he didn't like his instructor, and he quit playing the viola. And I asked him one day, I said, "Hey, what's the deal? Why don't you want to play the viola anymore?" And he says, "Dad, it's just not fun anymore." And I said, "Well, what do you mean it's not fun anymore? You love music. You love playing music. When you're at home, you play music." He's like, "Yeah, but I my instructor, he's kind of a douchebag." And I'm like, "Well, that's not nice to say things like that." He's like, "But he is."
yeah.
And he felt as if his instructor was picking on him because he had difficulties focusing, he had difficulties staying still in his seat. and ultimately his instructor felt he was being disruptive to the other students.
Mm.
And the I watched over the course of um, a month or two without being able to remove him from the class that he was taking, just lose all interest in music and playing music. And it was heartbreaking to me. I never did have a discussion with the instructor. I left that up to my wife, and I was like, look, if I talk to the guy, I'm probably going to get, words crossed. I don't know exactly what happened. In situations like these, I usually I give benefit of the doubt to the authoritative authoritative figure, because I know how kids are. So I ultimately I we removed him from the class, and slowly he's starting to get that love back. But what, in your experience, is that what happens in basketball? Parents are just too rough on the kids or too rough on the coach, and it ruins the fun for everybody.
Yeah, I think Ricky, you caught a lot of it in a nutshell. You mentioned parents being assholes to coaches or whatever it was. I think in society we just have a hard time not being assholes to each other, right? And so
Yes.
I was going through my head at one point, what is a parent's role? And I would list out like as many words that came to my mind. And I said, what's a coach's role? And I would list out words, and there were at least half that crossed over. We have, and granted, not all parents are great, not all coaches are great, not all teachers are great, not all viola instructors are great. But I would say the vast majority on both sides are trying to do the right thing in raising their kids. And the old saying, right? It takes a village to raise a child. I know in my lifetime, coaches and teachers were paramount to my growth and my maturity. And certainly, you mentioned authoritative figure. They were that. I would never think. I mean, I would joke around and be a wise guy in class every now and then, but when the teacher said knock it off, I knocked it
Yeah.
off, right?
You
Because they're the
definitely didn't
authority.
let them hear any of that stuff.
Yeah, and so today I think, and there's a chapter in my book titled "Rose Colored Glasses," which you also mentioned. I think that's a big part of it. You either have parents who are trying to live vicariously through their kids, and maybe what the parent couldn't achieve, they want the child to, which is an unordinary amount of pressure, right? Why
Right.
would we dump that on the kid? Um, I've had personal experiences in my life. My best friend in eighth grade was a stud wrestler. I mean, an absolute stud. And he did it all the time. Of course, he played other sports as well, because back in my day, you played multiple sports, but his focus was wrestling. And he was so good at it, so much so that in eighth grade, he went to Australia and represented the U.S. in a wrestling match. And against 18, 19, 20-year olds, he went 10-1.
Wow.
You're thinking, okay, this guy's a lock for a college scholarship. He stopped wrestling. He never wrestled in high school, ever, as good as he was. And part of it, you could see the burnout.
Yeah.
You could see the burnout in this kid. So I think a lot of times parents, they don't check in enough to, hey, how are you? Do you enjoy this sport? Do you enjoy this instrument? Do you enjoy whatever discipline it is that they're trying to learn? And yes, we need to help them push past the hurdle, the initial hurdle. Well, I don't want to do this, to hey, stick it out for a little bit and let's see where you are. And then eventually you're going to know whether they are passionate about it, because you'll see in the way they're acting. You'll see the love, like you're seeing in your son now, shine, right?
Yeah.
Or they'll just move on to something else.
Yeah. That's been my experience as well. I think we need to foster our the the things that our kids love. I think we need to foster that and push them towards those things, and not overwhelm them with, like you said, the things that we living vicariously through our children. I do that on a daily basis. I got to be honest with you. I've never been like a sports player or anything like that, but like I love traveling. And because of that, my kids love traveling. We take them all kinds of places. We love like Universal Studios. We love going and hanging out at Universal Studios, the theme parks, roller coasters, all that good stuff. I love that stuff. And for when we take our kids to like Universal Studios, or we have a local amusement park near us, when we take them there, and I get to see the smiling faces and the laughs, and I take mental snapshots of the moment, and I'm like, look at these kids, they're so happy. Um, that's my way of living vicariously through my kids, because I never got to do that shit when I was little.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can, as parents, think of those moments where the kids are smiling. I'm sure you've had those moments where you're thinking in the back of your mind, man, I really got to remember this right here. And I think as parents, if we take those moments and try to create more of them as we're doing the things that we don't want to do, or we ultimately, our kids don't want to do, I think we'd be a lot happier.
Yeah, I agree with you 1000%. And I mean, you mentioned earlier the percentage of kids that go on to play in college. I mean, if you look at it just within my sport, and I want to be clear, this is a story, my story told through the lens of basketball, but I firmly believe it applies to not all youth sports, but transcends into the business world, into regular life,
Oh yeah.
just in the way we treat people, right? But within basketball, to get a scholarship to a Division I school, it's 3.6% of kids. To go on and play in the NBA, it's less than 1%.
Yeah.
But there are so many people like, oh, that's what we got to go do. That's what we got to do. And they dump a lot of money into training and they invest in all this kind of stuff. And I liken it to the stock market, right? We watch our 401ks and things like that. And then if the stocks aren't performing well, we start to panic or get frustrated because we're not getting a return on an investment. And I think honestly, a lot of parents who are pouring all this money into travel and individual trainers, sometimes multiple, are looking at that and saying, why isn't my kid getting this? Why, they're not getting enough playing time, da, 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 da. It might just be that your son or daughter is not grasping it. And I know in the game of basketball, as I told my kids, my players as well, it's just as much mental as it is physical. And if you
Yes.
sometimes kids are great physically at it, but they don't know what they're doing on the floor, and then vice versa. And it's really the special ones who can put both together. I would say in any discipline. I love music, but I can't play it to save my life, um, and that's okay. And that's what I think we as parents and people need to understand. That's okay. There is something out there that we can all be really good at.
Is there any moments that really stick out in your mind during your career where you're just like those moments, those snapshots in time where we look around and see all the faces, and we kind of take a mental snapshot? How many of those moments have you had in your career?
More than I can count. And I both in individual recognition, what I call light bulb moments. I loved it when I've been coaching a girl or a young man and trying to get them to understand the concept of basketball and how it applies to you being a part of a team and how you can contribute that way. And these are the things you need to do to get better. And all of a sudden, there's a moment in some practice or some game where it just goes bing. You can see it on their face, like, oh my God, that's what you've been talking about. And
Yeah.
yes, there's 1,000 of those. So it was kind of interesting when I was writing this book, even though it's about a negative event or events, I tried to intertwine some of those into the book because they are valuable. And it's important to understand that there's a great balance in that child's development where they're going to recognize failure, and that's okay. Right. I would encourage my kid, I would push yourself to fail. I don't care if you kick the ball across the court, run to it, pick it up, start over again. But you're going to learn, right? And in games when they miss a bucket or don't defend well, what you're going to fail, but learn from it. And out of that, there were many times in the book where I talk about that movement from failure to success, both on the court and in the relationship between the player or a parent and coach too. Where
Yeah.
there were some instances it started off really bad, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna go to blows with his dad the way he's talking. And then by the end of the time, I coached one gentleman, two of his sons, a few years apart. And at the end of it, it started out really rough. He wanted to get me fired from a volunteer job, and all this kind of good stuff. But at the end of it, he thanked me for making his boys better men.
That's that's amazing. That is awesome. As you're talking, I'm kind of getting goosebumps because you mentioned that light bulb moment, and with kids, man, you really can see it on their faces. And yesterday, I had one of those light bulb moments myself, and I wasn't talking to a person. I was actually talking to Chat GPT, and I had mentioned to Chat GPT as I'm talking to it, like, hey, I got this light bulb moment, and uh, nobody's here. It's just me and you, and I'm talking to a robot. And so I thought, like, well, this is kind of like one of those moments where you do something really unintentionally funny or you fall down or something and nobody's there to see it.
Yeah.
And so I was telling my wife about this moment, and I don't think she found it as funny as I did, but those light bulb moments, I really kind of live for those light bulb moments, when I find that connection
Yeah.
I don't really hang out with a whole lot of other kids, just my kids. But when I'm with my kids and I see that light bulb moment, when I see that switch from confused to I get it now, there is so much excitement there, no matter what it is. No matter, like, it could be something as simple as mowing the yard or taking out the trash. Once you see that switch from kind of confused to, oh, I get it now, that is such an amazing feeling as a educator, as a teacher, as a parent.
Yeah.
That's an awesome feeling. It's like not only have they won, but hey, I won too. And that's so amazing that you mentioned that like I have those moments and I talk about those light bulb moments all the time, and I feel like sometimes I feel like people don't understand what the hell I'm talking about when I say those things.
Yeah,
But
I think parents sometimes, or people in general, the way our society is sometimes, especially around sport, it's all driven to, who scored the most points.
yes,
And yes,
yes,
that there's value to that in the game, right? You can't win without scoring points and scoring more points than your opponent does. But there's a lot of elements in the game, any sport, and probably any discipline that lead to the opportunity to be victorious, whether through
yeah,
scoring or something else. So a lot of times in my interactions with parents are like, well, how come Susie only scored 8 points today? She scored 8 points. She only had six the last game. So that's a bonus. But she grabbed 7 rebounds and she had 2 steals. And you see her dive on the floor after that loose ball? Those are
yeah.
all
I would
wins.
be like, you're looking at it all wrong.
Yeah.
She didn't only score 8 points; she scored 8 points.
And oh, by the way, your team won because your daughter scored 8 points,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes perspective is everything. And I think a lot of times in team sport or team activities, too many people get wrapped around what I'm contributing, what I'm doing, the me part of it,
Yes.
as opposed to the we part of it.
Yes, I'm a big NFL fan. I love NFL football. I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
By the way, I have a
Um,
beef about that because I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. I despise the Philadelphia Eagles, and I was pulling for your Chiefs this year. So you were let down, but so was I.
yeah, that was a heartbreaker, man. But as a Chiefs fan, we kind of I don't know. I don't want to speak for all of Chiefs Kingdom, but the people that I know that are fans, we kind of expected it because we were challenged so much during the regular season. I say we like I'm actually on the team, but
You
they
are.
so, so the Chiefs were challenged so much during the regular season. However, they weren't. It didn't seem to be that they were high caliber teams. It seemed like Kansas City was always playing down to their competition, and sometimes it bit them in the ass.
Mhm.
And to be quite honest with you, I did not see a Super Bowl caliber team this year. I was hopeful, but I didn't see it. And I think you really touched on something when you talked about the individuality of us as humans, as people, and how it relates to team sports. That's part of the reason why when you go overseas to other countries and that aren't like the United States, you see their teams, their team sports they behave differently because they're not individuals where they live. The United States is a very individualistic society, and sometimes that bites us in the ass.
Which is crazy to think about given our history, right? The amount of individuals who came over here from all over the place to unite and make this special country. and then an entire generation, the greatest generation, to go on and fight the world's war, and secure freedom and democracy as much as they could, right, throughout the
Absolutely.
world, and have such a positive info. I mean, they just dropped everything and went overseas. Men 18, 19 years old. And when they were gone, the women here dug in and did the things that men used to do in our country. That's teamwork. And that has
Yes.
gone away in a big way. Yes.
Yeah, I miss those. I miss the times where back in when I was a kid, we used to have um, these moments in time where something bad would happen, like a natural disaster or um, like 9/11 was a good example. You
Yeah.
know, we all came together in those moments during and after. And I really miss those times. I miss people being for one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's you mentioned it early on, in the discussion, over the last 10 to 12 years, you've seen a kind of a switch. And I don't know if there's one thing to necessarily blame it on, but I do see that people are farther apart than we've ever been before. And it's just like, how do you think, do you think there's a way to bring everyone back to center without a major disaster happening to where we kind of realize that we need each other?
Ooh, that's a big question, Ricky. I think it all based around a pretty simple principle. The do unto others as you would have them do unto you concept, right? And COVID, believe it or not, I think had a pretty negative impact across the
Yes.
world, and that it caused people to go more into isolation and to become more separated from that human touch, that human engagement, the reliance on others. It was, you're basically in your basement. Like, I know for my job, I was in my basement on my computer trying to engage my customers as much as I can, and I struggled somewhat because I'm more of the handshake, hug, um, get to know you, sit down with you, break bread, eye to eye kind of contact. And here I am just talking to people on a computer, not
Yeah.
knowing the next where the world's going to go. So I do think there was a lot of isolationism caused then, and people were more focused on themselves or their specific unit, whether that's their immediate family or whoever was living with them, and kind of lost sight that even in that unit, right? There's a big puzzle out there, and we're all just a small piece of it. Whether it's your family, whether it's work, or in this case, a team, a sports team. I mean, I had a great example of it, that to reach 1,000 points in basketball in high school is a big thing, right? That's a big marker. Not a lot of people do it. And there's a chapter in here about 3 or 4 or 5 of those stories. One of them is my favorite, and it's about a young lady who didn't get there. She told me, her coming into her senior year, like the first day of practice, she said to me, Coach, I'm getting my 1,000 points this year. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. In my head, I would never say this to her in person, but I was like, I don't think you're even close, right? So I go back, and because I knew she didn't play much varsity as a freshman, and she was playing some as a sophomore, but got hurt. So I go back and look, and she's 545 points away from getting to 1,000. And I'm like, man,
Wow.
that's crazy. So I didn't want to deflate her desire, certainly. So I said something very simple to her. I said, listen, I'm glad that you want to go after your 1,000 points. We got a lot of ground to cover, but I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to do it through your teammates. I'm not changing things just to chase an individual goal. We're going to get there through your teammates. And she was all about it. She said, no, I understand, Coach. And at the end of the day, Ricky, it became a rallying cry for her teammates. They all wanted to be a part of it, all of them. So
That's
she got,
awesome.
what she ended up scoring, 503 points in her senior year. And 3 games had been canceled due to snow.
Wow.
Yeah. So she would have gotten there most likely. And unfortunately, when we lost in the state playoffs, when you're done, when states start, you can't play any more games by state rules. But our last game, they sat out at half court as a team, uh, hugging, crying, laughing. And even though we'd fallen short during the season, and she had fallen short individually, that chemistry, that was the best team I ever coached.
Yeah,
That's
and ultimately she won, right? I mean, she
yeah.
didn't get her 1,000 points, but she did what she came there to do. She kicked some ass.
Yeah, and circling back to the question, she knew that she was part of something bigger than herself, but she also knew she was a catalyst to pulling that group together. So that was the cool thing. That was that moment that I remember so clearly. Along with others, but that was one that just jumps out at me all the time when we're talking about team and unification.
Yeah, you mentioned COVID, man. A lot of shit changed during the COVID lockdowns, and I think that like that's how ultimately I got into doing this. Um, it for me, I didn't know these things were a possibility for a guy like me. I have always wanted to be like a broadcast journalist ever since I was a little kid, but I didn't know how to accomplish those things. And I thought that, man, I'm going to have to spend a bunch of money. I'm going to have to go to training, this, that, and the other thing. So I didn't, I gave up on it kind of. And during COVID, during the lockdowns, everything was going remote. And I was like, and at the time, I was like, this is awesome. Like the whole world just got a bunch smaller for people like me. And the things that I was doing in person, I can now do remotely. I can talk to people across the ocean if I want to. And so that was like the start of how I got into this, or like there's obviously multiple things that came together to make this happen, but during the lockdowns is like I kind of realized this was possible for a guy like me.
Mhm.
And those moments are, I mean, they happen a lot during the recording of the podcast and stuff like that. And I don't I don't know how we go upon fixing the damage that we've done unintentionally, because there's so many people like me who are raring to go, who are excited about remote possibilities and stuff like that. Now, I just want to go back to the way things were. You'd mentioned like you're more of a handshake kind of guy. I'm more of a face to face kind of guy. I would much prefer to do this in studio for 2, 3 hours at a time, but I find like where I live is uh, it's not conducive to that. There's not very many people where I live. Like there, so Kansas City metro area is like 800,000 people, and I'm an hour away from that.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's like the town I live in, 75,000 people. There's plenty of interesting people here. Just like getting them on camera is an issue.
Yeah.
So um, I really, really resonate with that, and how much those things have changed the way we live life. And it's absolutely crazy how far we've come in the last 5 years of just making things so impersonable,
Mm.
and AI is only going to make that worse. So
Yeah, I mean, I listen. I think there's a lot of good things that have come and will continue to come out of AI, but I do agree that it's going to have a negative effect on those people who can't or don't have the discipline to stay engaged. Otherwise, I have a coworker who runs all of her emails through AI. And I was like, oh, that's great. Well, why don't you just practice writing better? Because writing is a wonderful thing, right? And it's a great form of communication. Just practice it. And in order to get good at it, you have to humble yourself in a way, right? Like when I started writing this book, I was like, okay, I think it sounds good to me. But I then, once I got it to a point, I took it and I gave it to a few people of different ilks. And one was my old English department. I used to work for the Naval Academy Prep School as an English instructor. But the guy who ran the department, I said, would you mind just reading this book and see if it makes sense? Is it appealing? And I humbled myself because he could have come back and said, man, that really sucks. Don't even think about moving it forward. But everybody who read it and had input, I then brought it back and took help it make shape of what I was ultimately trying to say. And so the person who's not writing the email but having AI do it, they're losing that ability to craft or to shape their craft or to learn or to fail and learn from that failure.
you want to talk a little bit about the issue that got you canceled from basketball?
Sure. Yeah, that was a tough
I don't
one.
want you to give too much away or what's in the book or anything, but I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I was it was January 11th, 2022. I was in the gym coaching against what had become a rival to ours, one of the best schools in the state. At the time, they were ranked third in our conference, which is the most competitive conference in New Jersey, the Shore Conference. They were a perennial powerhouse. They were a Catholic school. They always had 4 or 5 Division I girls on their team, 6'2", 6'4", 6'5" kind of talent.
Wow.
And I was at a smaller public school, where we did have 2 6'1" girls, but they would probably get blown over in a gusty wind. And one of them was Division I, the other was Division III. As seniors, they were heading that way. So I did have some talent, but the rest were soccer players, um, softball players, girls who just wanted to be part of the social event of playing a sport for their school, which was great. As long as they were there and willing to learn. So we had beaten RBC, Red Bank Catholic, the year before in a big upset. It was awesome. Put us on the map. And now they're back in our gym with girls who were on that team as juniors and not very happy that that we beat them. And there was a big uprising in the Shore about how we're now on the map and we beat the big RBC team, big bad RBC. So going into that, this was my 4th year in the program, and I had some really good seniors, a couple good juniors, and I knew this was our moment to propel into that next level. And I kept encouraging the girls. We just had to build that chemistry, right? So coming into the RBC game, we played them tremendously well. We had scouted the opponent. We looked at some weaknesses where we could expose them. Girls played it to a T. And late in that game, we were down 6 or so points. We ended up losing by 9, but it was a phenomenal effort, and on both sides. But I was particularly proud of my girls, and I told them after that, we have 2 games in front of us. One was against a weaker division opponent, but we can't look past them. The next one was against another top 20 team in the state, and I told them flat out, when we beat them, we're going to be in that top 20. And girls were going crazy, and we were having fun in the locker room. And as we end all things in any of our meetings, we put our hands together and called out together, because that was our common theme. Like, let's do this together. The next morning, I get a call from the principal saying that I'm suspended indefinitely. And I'm scrambling, trying to figure out what, where, why, who's the accuser, what are they saying? And I'm running through my head, like, what interaction would have gotten me suspended? Um,
Right.
And throughout that day, I started to get texts from people throughout the basketball community saying, "Hey, I heard what happened." I'm saying, "What do you mean you heard what happened? I just found out about it." But they were all very, very supportive. And I spent basically 40 days trying to figure out what is this all about, and 40 days in a position where nobody in the school leadership did the core of their job, which was lead. The athletic director had only been in that job for 2 weeks, so he was a nice guy, but kind of useless in terms of taking any leadership or ownership throughout the principal, who I know pretty well, just disappeared on me. And eventually it ended up in the superintendent of the Board of Education's hand. And I couldn't get anybody to even respond. Like, what is going on? What are the accusations? Let's get in a room and talk about this, because I was just befuddled. It turned out, long story short, that a freshman in my program who wanted to be on varsity desperately, but she was on the junior varsity program, was unhappy about that. So she and her parents were complicit on creating this accusation of inappropriate touching against me.
Wow.
But it wasn't her. She used a senior and a sophomore as the quote unquote victims. And then once I started to dig into it, I found out that, well, the way I look at it was her parents used her as a shield to levy this accusation against me, because they saw me as an obstacle in the way of getting her to, or allowing her to play varsity and getting that, those shining moments. And they used 2 other parents' daughters as weapons to get at me without any approval, without any authority from the parents to do so. As a matter of fact, one of the parents, the father of the oldest person, the senior who was one of the quote unquote victims, he wrote a scathing email to the parents of the team saying, "How dare you use my daughter?" So that, that's kind of the gist of it. 40 days I sat out. I was forced to sit out of a season that was supposed to be the moment, for me, for these girls, for our program, and they were forced to have to endure this uncertainty. This, was there any validity to me? And all of them felt absolutely not. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks into it, 2 weeks after I was accused, there was a Board of Education meeting where one parent got up and read a letter on behalf of 18 out of the 19 parents in the program. So you can guess who the one was that abstained. But not only did she read it, every other parent stood up behind her in a show of solidarity for me, for my coaching staff, etc. Then a second mother got up, who was a mother of a senior captain, and read a letter on behalf of 18 out of the 19 players and our manager. And it was basically, coach has done nothing wrong. He is a man of honor. He teaches us, he's a mentor. He teaches us respect. He treats us with respect. And all of them were asking me for me to be back on the sidelines. So I thought, okay, this has got to be it. Leadership has heard this loud and clear. And it was crickets. And it wasn't until 40 days later, 40 days after that initial accusation, that I finally got a chance to sit down with the board, but they had made up their mind. And at that point, the season was essentially over, you know?
Wow. Man, that must have been so surreal to go through and not have any answers, man. I've never been through anything like that to that magnitude.
Yeah.
I've had situations happen that were really surreal that I was like, man, is this real life? Is this really happening? So not only you were that was your job, right? Your coaching job. You weren't volunteering.
At that point, it was my quote. It was my passion, but I did it as a part time job. Yeah, so I did get a small stipend to coach at the high school level in New Jersey. But my job, no, I'm not in the education field. I work outside of that.
Okay, yeah. So man, for me that I would have silently been going nuts in my head trying to like, why is this happening to me? What did I do? And in reality, it's probably not even personal towards you. It was that, mom and dad didn't feel like player was getting enough playing time or whatever the case may be. Like I've talked about that like before, the all the fights and the accusations and the my kid's the best, and I don't understand that kind of thinking. From We're supposed to be teaching our kids, you know uh, better lessons than that. If we're that's like teaching the kid, later on in life, if you're not happy with your employer, you just level all kinds of accusations, and who cares if they're true or not. Throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. But you're talking about people's lives hanging in the balance. I know people. I've seen news stories where accusations like that absolutely ruin people's lives. And had you not had a bunch of support, had you not had 18 out of 19 parents come and support you, that could have ruined your life. You could have been, I mean, you could have been in jail for that, maybe. you
Well, I
know
did have to
um,
go to the police department, which
that
was
is
that was a crazy
insane.
scene. Yeah. I found out that at one point in, I think, my last phone call with the principal, trying to get answers, trying to see who on there. At one point, he said to me, "I'm not going to argue with you," and I told him, "I don't need you to argue with me. I need you to argue for me. You know me. You know that this is not true." And in that same conversation, he said, "Well, the girls are going through police interviews." And I was like, "Police?" That
Wow.
became real. That was a gut shot. And at that point, I had to go out and get an attorney at my own cost, because I'm not a teacher. I wasn't covered by the union, had no protection. And obviously, the leadership, the administration, they were all in cover your ass mode. They were
Yeah,
all,
politics,
yes,
politics.
100%. And it just became real. So I had to go to the police department. As I walk in that day, Ricky, you should have, I mean, if you watch me walk in, you've probably seen like NYPD Blue and things like this, and the people doing the perp walk. But I walk into this police station, and lieutenants and chiefs and deputies are coming out of their office to shake my hand, to say hello, and to say, we're sorry that this is happening to you. And if that doesn't tell you something, right?
Absolutely. I mean, wow. I just, as you're telling this story, I'm kind of getting angry. You
Yeah.
know, I'm because like I don't know you, but just this interaction here, I like you,
Well,
and I'm
thank you.
like, man, you're welcome. Um, I'm just like I can't. I've seen this kind of stuff before, but never with a coach. You
Mm.
know, I have seen accusations of inappropriate touching in actually really close to me. I without giving too much away, it's like a family member that was accused by another family member, and later on it came out that this other family member was just angry, and it was the wildest thing that we had ever been through at that point. It was like I started questioning my own reality. Like, do I really know this person? Is that what it was it like that with you? Trying to guess what could have happened, like, and you know yourself, you've been everywhere that you've been. um was it really like, I can't believe this is happening? I'm trying to rack your brain and figuring out like what was going on during those 40 days, and how you felt internally towards yourself and towards everybody else in the situation. What was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was harrowing. There was not a day that went by. Actually, I would say for 2 years, beyond the 40 days, where at some point during the day, I was thinking about it. Sometimes
Wow.
multiple times during the day. But during those 40 days, I would rack early on, I'd rack my brain like, what was it that could be misinterpreted to fit that accusation? I would think about previous kids that I coached, boys and girls, and now are they starting to wonder, like, well, wait a minute, who was this guy? Is this which one's the real one? Which thankfully was not the case. I mean, so many of my former players reached out, coaches that I worked with, athletic directors, referees in the shore conference were like, if they're willing to do this to you, who's going to want to coach there, kind of thing. And so the endorsement and support of the community was great. But yes, in my head, I'm still trying to figure out what is it that I did to anybody, let alone this young lady, and to her parents, who I think I met the father once and never met the mother. But to them, that would allow them or liberate them to act in such an evil way towards somebody, to levy that accusation. And unfortunately, it was coming out of COVID. It was a year and a half, 2 years out of it. We saw a rash of the Me Too movement, right? Which, listen, there's two sides to that, and I want to be very clear about that. Anybody who has had an experience, where they have been touched inappropriately or something done wrong to them, they should be heard, and they should be
Absolutely.
protected, and they should be guarded, right? But at the same time, just because you come out and say it doesn't make it real.
Yeah.
But everybody was so hypersensitive to that the moment that term came up, inappropriate touching, I mean, the administration didn't know how to behave. And
Yeah.
on top of that, there was zero accountability, zero ownership on their side to do that, to behave in a way to what they were hired to do. Right?
It's like, where's my due process here?
There was no such thing.
Right.
No
That's
such thing.
wild. That's
So yeah, I
wild
mean,
to me. And
I
I've
would,
seen those accusations. Like, so there's a middle school teacher where I live that was just accused of inappropriate touching. Well, not accused, like he's been convicted now.
yeah,
But those incidents do happen, and those victims do exist. And in in my mind, when you throw out a bunch of false accusations, you are essentially making not necessarily a mockery of those victims, but you're making what they went through mean less.
yeah.
Does that mean does that
There's a
I,
kid's book written about it, The Boy Who Called Wolf. Right?
exactly. Yes, exactly. It's so incredibly. I would never in a million years think to level inaccurate accusations against anyone. to further my agenda,
Hmm.
I would I would work harder if that's what I needed to do. If there was someone that I felt was standing in my way, I would go around them,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't cause unnecessarily damage or unnecessary damage to those people and make them my victims, because that's essentially what they've done to you is they've made you their victim. So with the quote unquote victims of your situation, what were they saying?
Well, the father wrote that terse email to the team, and he's quoted in my matter of fact. I asked him for permission to use that in the book, and he said absolutely. And then when he read the book, he actually texted me the next day after having read, completing it, and said, "This is making me mad all over again." And then he was very clear that his daughter, I was his daughter's coach, not the principal who took over for me, but I was her coach, and I'm the one who treated her with respect and did things to help her mature, not just as a basketball player, but as a woman, as a person, who was going off to that next level to play in college, but to be a student in college and figure life out, right? I'm a graduate of the Naval Academy. One of the things that they taught us, their whole principle is based on um, the moral, mental, and physical preparation of young men and women to go into the Navy or Marine Corps as officers, to be in a position to lead and cultivate positive culture. And I took that seriously. I mean, I brought it into the way I coach, right? I wasn't just coaching basketball. I wanted to treat them or teach them morally, mentally, and physically how to be better people. So then the other one, I mean, that was the second daughter that I had coached, and the oldest daughter, both were livid, but the oldest daughter I coached for 3 years, and she was so mad. She wrote a letter to the board on her own, and I mean, I was just extremely touched by the community around, not just in the school. And there were students in that school who had nothing to do with sport, who were writing letters to the board saying this is an embarrassment to us and to our school. So I,
Wow.
I felt grounded in that. I felt honored by all of that. But at the same time, I was still racking my brain. Like, how could anybody, from the accusation piece, levy something so false? What stirs up inside of somebody that they're willing to do that, right? To victimize somebody else. Um, on the flip side of that, I was like, how can the board, how can the principal, how can the administration sit here and do nothing about it? Because even if I had done something wrong or accidentally, maybe in the throes of patting somebody on the back, I hit them too low, or maybe they didn't understand why I patted them on the head in a loving way, whatever it is, let's talk about it. Because
Yeah.
as old as I am and as much as I've coached, I still need to learn, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that because like that's one of the things that I say all the time. When we get out of school, we don't like a lot of people when they leave high school or college, they're like, "Oh, I'm done learning."
Uh,
That's not that's not even close to accurate. And my whole life, I've sought out information to learn. So I always share those things with my kids, like, hey, you're like with my son who's recently graduated. He graduated high school in 2022, and we had a conversation over the summer. I was like, listen, you're done with school. You've graduated high school.
mm,
You don't have any plans to go on to college. However, just because you are done with school does not mean you're done learning. Every day is an opportunity to learn something that you didn't know the day before. And I'm like, I tell him all the time, like, seek out information. If you hear something and you don't know that to be true, seek out more information,
uh,
learn about it. If you see a subject that you're interested in, like a conflict overseas, research, learn about it, and read history and stuff like that, because every day is another opportunity to learn something you didn't know the day before.
yeah.
And so that brings me to writing. So you were in the Naval Academy and ultimately the Navy,
Mhm.
and you were a basketball. What else do you do?
Well, I'm a regional vice president for a flooring manufacturer, Shaw Industries. I work for one of their commercial divisions called Packcraft, which is kind of cool because I have a team of 8 or 9 people now responsible for, it's like $15 million worth of carpet sales throughout New York and New Jersey. And a lot of what I learned and taught and the principles that I applied to basketball as a coach, I brought to work, in terms of coaching and managing and leading, and vice versa. There were things I would take from work and spin it into basketball because it was great. But to your point, I've got 8 or 9 people under me who are learning the process of building relationships, of leading customers, understanding their solutions, providing the pathway to whatever that solution is, negotiating, relationship building, all those kind of things, having crucial conversations with their customers and with each other because they are part of a team with me, as their leader. And it's such a wonderful experience. I work for a phenomenal company. Um, but one of the things I encourage all my people to do is be a sponge, especially the younger ones when they go off tour. We have a world-class training program. And one of my more recent hires says to me, he said, "What do I do?" I said, "Just go be a sponge. First of all, there's no way you're going to remember everything that they're throwing at you, but absorb what you can, find out what your passion is, where your level of expertise is, and just drive at it. But always be a sponge to what's being shared with you. And you're going to find that moment, that light bulb moment again, back out in the field where it clicks and you realize that, hey, this part of what I do is where I really want to focus, and
Yeah.
another young lady who's our showroom manager said, "Oh, I get it now," or she made some reference to learning something. And I said to her, "If you're not learning every day, you're not doing your job."
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, like, what was it like when you decided to write a book?
Mm-hmm.
Did you already have that knowledge on how to write a book, or did you have to seek that out?
No, I did not have that knowledge. I was an English major at the Naval Academy, so I took a lot of literary
So you
classes.
had some experience in writing, but not book writing.
No, definitely not book writing. And honestly, I think anybody, and even with a podcast, like I told you earlier, my son and I do a podcast together. And my first reaction when he said, "Hey, Dad, let's do a podcast," which we call outside the coach's box, but he says to me, "Let's do a podcast." I'm like, "For what? Who's going to want to listen to us?" Right? And he said, "Dad, it's just father and son talking sports, which we do every day on the couch anyway. Let's not just share it with other people."
Yeah.
So he talked me into it. We do it. Same was true with writing the book. My first instinct was like, do I have enough of a story that it's interesting to other people? And I didn't want it to be just interesting to the basketball world, to high school girls basketball. I wanted it to be interesting to anybody, anywhere who's involved with the development of youth, but also have the opportunity, at the next level to engage, to consult, to lead, and have those interactions with people that you're part of a team, something bigger than yourself. So I wanted that same message to transcend from youth basketball into the rest of life, basically. And
Hell
so
yeah.
I was reading a few different books at the time, and I was kind of drawing inspiration from different authors on different subjects and the way they wrote and the way they presented their books, to the point where I've quoted a few of them in there. I wrote the way I started my book. I don't know if you're familiar with Bill O'Reilly's Killing series. Have you read any of those?
Yeah, yeah. I've
Phenomenal.
I've got actually on my shelf. I've got Killing Lincoln.
Yes.
And I borrowed that book from my mother. My mother recommended that book to me, and I didn't know who Bill O'Reilly was at that time. This was like, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Bill O'Reilly was, and now he's like, I love Bill O'Reilly. He's great.
Yeah. And he forget the political side of things. He this is a history book, right? Well, his whole series is about history, and he was actually a history professor at one point. But the way he wrote it, and every one of his books will start with the man who has 30 days left to live, or the empire that has 3 years left to exist, or whatever it is. Because I've read all of them and they're phenomenal. But I said, you know what, that's a great way of, I think, leading into my book. So I borrowed that, and I borrowed Stephen Covey's concept of 7 habits of better people or better leaders, was start with the end in mind. And that's actually the title of my first paragraph, and it starts with that game the night before I got suspended, right? And it ends with I was suspended indefinitely. So that, all of that convergence of influence and spending time to read and my history, with writing and literary analysis and things like that. So I poured myself into this book, and it just grew. It just went. And there were times where I had to be introspective and critical of self to make sure that I was staying on task. Because if I just started babbling about 33 years of my basketball experiences, 95% of which were phenomenal, I'd have like 3,000 pages or something. Nobody would want to read that.
Yeah, I've thought about writing a book myself, and like a couple of people have asked me, like, why don't you write a book of your experiences? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not sure I can remember all my experiences, um, but it's like I don't know where to even begin. I wouldn't. What story would I bring to start the book, or what would the book be about? I wouldn't even know. Like, but again, nothing's really happened to me in my life that is so, for a lack of a better word, overwhelming as what happened to you. And
Yeah.
I'm just so, I'm grateful that you want to share your experiences and what you learned from it, what everyone else got out of. I'm very happy that you decided to make this book and write this book. Um, when you were done with the book, did you did you think, finally, or was it more of a process? Okay, now I've got to get it out. Now I've got to get it published. Now I've got to promote the book. Was it more of a relief, or were you okay? Go time.
Well, now, I mean, it's the real work now. I'm telling you, I'm learning a lot as I'm going every day. So I think I told you pre-recording that there was a moment where I had all the information, all the I had an outline going. I had all the crux of writing a book. I just didn't discipline myself or commit myself to doing it. And I was in an early morning fog of I'm waking up, but my eyes aren't open, and the mind starts to click. And in that early morning rising moment, literally heard a voice, write the book. I was like, wow, what? It was kind of my Kevin Costner Field of Dreams moment, which we mentioned prior to, but that was the driver. Like, okay, I need to commit to doing this because obviously it's in my head, it's in my subconscious, right? It's an undone thing. So I got it done. Once I had the manuscript done and had a few people, like I shared with you, read it and kind of I added in some of their changes, I started the research. How do I get it out there? How do I publish it? And there, it used to be you had to get an agent, you had to find one of the top 5 publishers, get that agent to represent you, get the publisher to like it. It could be a 3 or 4 year process. And in my head, I was like, no, this is an important conversation that needs to be out in the ether as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Because even though I was out of coaching for 2.5 years at that point, I'm still seeing this problem percolate in across sports and in regular engagements with people day to day. I said, so this needs to get out. So I did some research online. I found out about these hybrid publishers. I vetted several of them. I landed on a company called the Paper House, which what set them apart was the guy who reached out or responded to my inquiry, called me on the phone, and we had a personal conversation where everybody else was trying to do it via email or text. And to me that was a distinguishing difference, right?
yeah.
Um,
I would have picked them too.
yeah, yeah. So we had great conversations and slugging it out and trying to find out a way. We got the initial wave was from my network. I mean, I think I sold 350 books like overnight, basically. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. But then I likened it to being Tom Hanks in Castaway, where I'm on this island, I'm secure, and that island's my network. But to get beyond that, I got to get past the breakers
Yeah,
and out into that
beyond
broader
that, you
ocean.
got to be like Wilson.
Yes, exactly. And so now I'm at that point trying to figure it out. Like, and I'm so grateful for podcasters like you who are willing to talk about it and to expose your audience to it. And I hope and pray that they pick it up and number one, enjoy it. Hopefully number two, get something out of it that they can take with them on a go forward basis, and then share it. Share it.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think
Share it
that
everywhere. Share
Yeah,
it
anything I
everywhere.
tag on Instagram, I end it with keep the conversation going because I think the only way we're ever going to resolve this toxicity, this dark side of youth sports, and the dark side of how we treat each other, is to just call it
Talk
out.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
talk about it
yeah,
and discuss it and don't run from it. Don't hide from it.
yep.
There is a question in your writer here that normally I don't do these type of things, but I saw this question here and I'm like, that's an interesting question. If Out of Bounds were adopted into a film or television series, which elements of the story do you think would resonate most strongly with audiences? And how would you like to see the story portrayed on screen?
Well, it is the journey of the coach player relationship at its core, and I'm sure there have been plenty of movies. There are plenty of movies around that kind of mentor mentee, Yoda and Luke Skywalker, whatever it is, where somebody who has a tremendous amount of potential in them needs something to pull it out of them. So that could be the core around it and the development of taking. Listen, I never, when I was an assistant coach for 6 years with St. John Vianney, I was part of a perennial powerhouse program. Prior to that, it was all ground up generation of building up a program, getting people to play together, working with kids who were either undersized, under talented, or just needed some help, needed some direction. And to me, that's what coaching was all about. So I would think it'd be some kind of maturation of that process would be the core of the movie. The message out of it is that we all need somebody to help us, to guide us. um, where you draw that from could be a multitude of people. You're helping your son kind of figure it out that, hey, I'm not really passionate about this music right now, and letting him know it's okay, but also being consoled in the fact that if he is really passionate about it, he'll come back to it. It'll come back, and it sounds like it has. And in this case, letting, or parents allowing their child, like letting go of their child for a second to a trusted source, to somebody who, again, if you break down the basic elements of parent versus coach, should be on a parallel line to try and help develop that child's drive, their mentality, their morality, how they're understanding and dissecting life, in this case, in a game, but taking those elements to what it can do to help them improve down the road.
Who do you see playing you on the big screen?
Oh, funny. I watched the last episode of 1923 today, and I love the power of Harrison Ford in there, but he might be a little too old. Maybe Matthew McConaughey. How's that?
That would be awesome. But we had mentioned a couple times in this interview, Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
And I was thinking Kevin Costner for a moment, and then there's this guy. He's named Kenny Johnson, and he played a small part on a series called Mayor of Kingstown.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I
And
love that show.
he played okay, so he plays the inmate Charlie,
Okay.
the guy that the Ian goes and picks up from the prison, and he takes him and he accidentally kills the guy, and so
He
you
was
kind of
in
look,
The Shield as well.
yeah,
Yes.
you kind
Yeah.
of look like that guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just maybe throwing that out there as you're talking. I'm like, hey, this guy would be perfect for that. But anyway, I think that's a great place to leave this conversation. It's been a great one, and I can't thank you enough for coming and hanging out with me and telling your story and talking about the book. And do you have any other projects in the works?
No, not as my project. My focus, outside of my family, of course, is and trying to be the best leader I can be at work, is getting this book out there and as wide as possible. You know, if anybody's interested, it's certainly available through Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and Ingram Spark is the publisher who does it. You can also get it there. But if you look at some of the responses on Amazon, it resonates with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
My wife's 80-year-old aunt who knows nothing about sports or basketball, and she bought the book and read it. She sent me a text, or through my wife, saying that I'm not a great reader. It's going to take me a while. Ricky, 3 days later, she texted my wife and said, "My tired old eyes went into overdrive. I knew nothing about basketball, but this is an amazing story outside of the painful part of it." But yeah, so I think it does resonate, and I hope people pick it up and look into it.
I'm gonna have to grab the book. The last book that I had like that, I actually just had the guy on the show a little while ago, and his book is due to be released on the 15th of April. So here in a couple days. Born from War is the name of the book, and it was a father and sons. So it starts the story telling, or starts the book telling the story of this guy's dad and what he went through in Vietnam and his experiences in Vietnam. And then later on in the book, it switches back and forth between dad's stories and his stories. And his story, a he's a veteran of uh, the Iraqi Freedom, Operation
Okay.
Iraqi Freedom. So
Yeah.
he was over there, and so it told the stories back and forth between his experiences and his father's experiences and how they relate them. And it was just an incredible book. And I started the book thinking, okay, this is going to be just like any other book. I'm going to take a couple weeks to read it. It's going to be okay. And um, but by the second chapter, I was hooked.
Yeah.
I couldn't put it down. And I finished the book, and I was have had the interview a couple days after I finished the book, and I was like, look, man, I've never. I'm in full blown fanboy mode here, because of the book, and you know, he did such an incredible job writing the story, and like you, he had experience writing, just not writing books.
Right.
And so I've definitely got to check out Out of Bounds. And again, it's Out of Bounds. You find it on Amazon. Where else can you find it?
Barnes and Noble, Ingram Spark. Anywhere you buy a book, pretty much it's out there.
Okay, Darren Ault, Out of Bounds. And what is the name of your? Go ahead and plug your podcast again.
It's outside the coach's box, available on Spotify and is on YouTube as well. And again, it's father son, and we don't do ESPN stuff, but we just kind of dissect sports, the world of sports, some of the crazy things that happen. We do stupid challenges with each other that somebody eventually has to pay off. It's a lot of fun, and I would be honored if you read the book, Ricky. We certainly like to know your reaction to it, and anybody. I'm going to be putting out a website pretty soon too, but there's an opportunity to interact through that website. So I'd love any feedback, any shared
Absolutely.
stories, any kind of conversation.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, I will I'll grab the book. I've got a couple books ahead of you. But I'll grab the book and I'll read it and I'll reach back out to you in a couple months and we'll do this again.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Awesome. Darren Ault, Out of Bounds. Thank you very much for coming and hanging out with us, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Ricky.
Bye.
Bye.